All right, next question. It's from the same guy, Warren, from the first question. And his question is, what is an emotional affair? What's the threshold where a relationship reaches that point, and where is it just a friendship between a man and a woman? This is a good question.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And like just to sit and think about that, I was thinking, if you are crossing the line into something emotional or something in your thought, that's going to start in your mind and emotions first. So I would say that's where you get that little check in your spirit, right? That I need to make an adjustment here. So either I feel an attraction towards someone or it seems like they feel an attraction toward me. I need to make an adjustment. So for some people, if it's just a fleeting thought, maybe you just need to make an adjustment. For someone else, it may need to reach out to someone and talk to them about it and be honest. Because of course we're not wanting to have secrets. And that's going to contribute to kind of that ongoing where it crosses the line.
Yeah, I think we want to look at, am I creating a level of conversation and connection with someone, not my spouse, that's really taking away from what I am intended to bring to my spouse, that level of openness and vulnerability. And we've got to be willing to ask ourselves the question, if I'm not bringing these things to my spouse, why not? And it could be that we're in a season where our marriage is in disconnect, maybe because of our sexual brokenness, there's not great communication. And I think if we're in a season like that, we're in kind of a heightened zone. We need to be cautious about who we do engage at that level of sharing our burdens and emotions with. And frankly, I believe it should be someone of the same gender. It should be a brother in Christ or a sister in Christ of the same gender, that I am not going to have that issue of, boy, I became entangled emotionally just because they listened and they cared. So I would kind of start there. If you're married, I think the question is just always, if 100% of what I said and shared with this person was known to my spouse, and maybe it should be, are they comfortable with it?
Yeah.
Would they feel this is all totally appropriate and I understand why you're talking to them or why you talk to them and to me or not to me? So I think the spouse comfort level is a really big deal. And if you feel like, oh, well, I wouldn't want to tell her we were having those conversations, well, then you have your answer right there. If there's conversations you're having with other women or other men that you wouldn't tell your spouse about, you're crossing some lines, and I think you know it. Another example I would bring up too is there when there is a significant age difference, I think there are levels that it's more appropriate to go deep with someone. And the example I would bring up is when I was a young pastor in my early 20s, I had a lady on staff who was in her late 50s, and she was motherly. She was our children's ministry and women's ministry director. There was no concern on either of our parts that there would be any ever sexual attraction. And I could be open with her about things I was struggling with at a work level.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't bring to her my marriage problems, or although she was a wonderful listener, counseling type.
Yeah.
But there was a freedom there that I felt like, I know I can be really honest with Anne, and there's no danger that this is going to get complicated or messy. And I would not have had that same kind of conversation with, say, a female who was a peer, just because there's complications when it is someone around your age and sphere of life that, boy, we get enmeshed with people emotionally, and that's not wise. But if it's someone that is of a much different age group, and that's the last thing I was going to say, what is the purpose of my sharing with them, of that conversation? And if I begin to realize the purpose is that, man, when I go and talk to this person, they make me feel so good. Well, that's a red flag to me too about that relationship, because now you're going to them for what they do for you, and it's going to create more desire and more connection versus like the illustration I was sharing about my coworker, Anne. I went to Anne not because she made me feel good. I went because we could process and we could figure out, like, what do we do about this person, or what do we do in this situation, or how can I respond better? Like, it was helpful and instructive, but it wasn't about this, well, I'm not getting... And this is what we do hear a lot when emotional affairs are going on, is that someone begins to say things like, well, my spouse doesn't listen, or my spouse doesn't get it, or my spouse doesn't care, or my spouse is too busy for me. And so I've created this alternative person I go to, and man, that makes me feel good. And they realize they're beginning to get from another person something that they should be getting from in their marriage relationship. And again, even if your marriage relationship is strained and you're not getting that connection that you want there, we shouldn't be taking that to someone of the opposite gender that's just going to create, I think, an avenue of danger. So those are some of the things that came to mind for me.
I think a helpful question too could be, if the roles were reversed and my spouse had a relationship with someone of the opposite sex, what would I be comfortable or uncomfortable with? And that's not a perfect system, But it's like if I knew my wife was texting, one of our male friends privately and I didn't know about it and was, they were going out to lunch or they were spending extended times chatting online or something like that. It's like, well, okay, I have some questions about that and have some concerns. It's like, well, that could be a pretty good barometer of where you are with your relationships with the opposite sex. And so I think that's just maybe a helpful question as you're exploring this idea. But gosh, you could also ask, if you're married, ask your spouse, like, what levels of interaction are you comfortable with? Like, and what's funny is, we have a lot of, couple friends, and I'm also friends with the wife, but there are times where it's like, I have to make sure, is this okay with Amy? Is she good with, this kind of conversation? And yeah, I think that those kind of guardrails to be proactive can also help you not ever step into this.
Yeah, I think just an awareness right there is so important, being self-aware. The fact that someone would ask the question and be aware is kind of put you steps ahead, because it's what I would call a high risk scenario a lot of times. So with people, depending on the relationship, some couples are okay if you're friends with someone of the opposite sex, and yet is it a high risk scenario for you? So I think it's just important to keep evaluating that. And then I think we do know if this is something where I'm desiring more emotional connection with them and less with my spouse. That would be an indicator, that I'm crossing a line internally, even if my behavior hasn't. And that's where denial comes in for some people of like, I haven't crossed a line here, therefore it's fine.
Yeah.
So just say that self-awareness. And if you're going to side on good boundaries and protection around your heart because you have, your commitment and your values, then I think you're going to know I need to make an adjustment here.
Yep.
Yeah, I think as soon as you feel yourself justifying the relationship, it's an indicator that you're aware there's something there, because if you're saying to yourself, well, at least it's not physical. It's like, well, why do you feel the need to say that?
Yeah,
well, at least we're not
right.
kissing, or we're not, crossing these physical boundaries. It's like, again, you're feeling a need to justify what you are doing, which should be a danger zone. And totally agree, Tracy. In light of our own story and history, we have to be aware of there may be, even in health, we just know our story and say, I'm just not going to risk it. I'm not going to risk being in situations or private conversations that could either become a stumbling block for me or for the perception for my spouse or others could feel inappropriate. I want nothing to do with it. The Bible encourages us to be above reproach in this area.
Right.
And I think if others would look at that and go, oh, you and this person privately text dozens of times a day, like even if it's totally innocent, I think most people would have some concern about that. Yeah. And I don't know that we'd be living above reproach now in that area. So there's not only the question of like, what's an emotional affair? There's even more the question of what's just appropriate for the kind of life I want to live as a man or a woman of integrity, even if I'm not asking questions about is this or isn't this an emotional affair. So